Next to the body, among the diver's equipment, Tarek notices a camera lying on the rock ledge 91 meters below the waterline. The Blue Hole in Dahab, Egypt is a sinkhole over 100 meters deep, famous for the arch that connects it to the Red Sea. At 56 meters deep, there's a 26-meter-long tunnel that connects the Blue Hole to the Red Sea called the Arch. Divers describe the breathtaking experience like standing in an underwater cathedral, but it also has another almost biblical nickname that it's earned over the years: the Divers' Cemetery. The number of lives lost to the Blue Hole is no secret. There are plaques and signs posted to commemorate every one of almost 200 divers that didn't resurface alive. Even highly accomplished, well-trained divers have managed to lose their lives in the cemetery. Because of its incredible depth, ease of access, and the controlled environment it offers with no ocean current, it's a great location for freediving record attempts. But when there are limits to be broken, the dangers follow. In 2017, a safety diver lost his life when freedive world record holder Alessia Zecchini made an attempt to swim through the arch in a single breath. She lost her bearings partway through, and Stephen Keenan, a 39-year-old from Dublin and one of the most accomplished divers in the industry, swam to her aid and brought her to safety. But he lost consciousness during the rescue and drowned. Divers at all levels of experience and qualifications are drawn to the Blue Hole. The beautiful natural formations linking the exposed ocean to the enclosed environment makes it feel safe and exciting. But it's this thin line that puts it right on the edge, and we're drawn to the edge. Experts are divided on whether the location deserves its gruesome reputation. The body count is high, but as long as you stay within the limits of your own training and experience, you'll be fine. The arch at 56 meters deep is absolutely beyond the limit for most people, and on the edge of the limits for professional freedivers. That depth is also just beyond the limit for most recreational scuba divers. And a very limited group of people have the training, experience, and equipment to dive to the bottom of a 100-meter sinkhole. For most snorkelers, freedivers, and scuba divers, there are interesting features to explore inside the limits of their levels of experience and comfort. The saddle at the surface where the ocean spills into the sinkhole is 6 meters deep, making it perfect for snorkeling, just deep enough to dive down and explore. There's a section called El Bell, or the Bells, which descends to 26 meters, then through a short arch into the ocean. Again, just inside the limits for recreational divers. And freedivers can descend down a shot line inside the Blue Hole to test their personal depth limits. But the mecca for most divers is the arch at 56 meters, just outside the limits for most divers. Now, I keep talking about the limits, and these aren't randomly made up numbers. There are 3 limits to understanding this story: time, depth, and gas. Most recreational scuba divers breathe air, which for simplicity is 20% oxygen and 80% nitrogen. At the surface, that mixture is perfect for us to breathe. We need oxygen, but not too much, and our bodies have nitrogen gas in the tissue. But if we descend to 10 meters deep and breathe compressed air, it's like we're breathing twice as much oxygen and nitrogen. Our body absorbs the nitrogen, and we can tolerate some more oxygen to a point. At 50 meters deep, breathing air is the equivalent of breathing 100% oxygen. We can tolerate it for a period of time, but not if we go much deeper. In fact, the absolute limit for breathing air as it relates to oxygen is between 60 and 70 meters. Deeper than that, and you start to experience convulsions, and then you're dead. But there are other limits related to nitrogen. Your body slowly absorbs nitrogen as you descend, but on the way up, it has to expel that nitrogen. So there are depth and time limits. The more time you spend, or the deeper you go, the more nitrogen your body absorbs and the more time it takes to expel. The depth limit for recreational divers breathing air is 40 meters deep so that you don't get close to the depth limit for oxygen toxicity. And at 40 meters, you only have 9 minutes before you have to ascend. If you spend longer than that, you have to start making decompression stops to give the nitrogen time to expel. But you also start to get nitrogen narcosis at around 30 meters. That's a narcotic effect that nitrogen has on your body. The deeper you go, the more narked you feel. Some people tolerate it better than others, to a point. Everybody gets narked at some depth. And nitrogen narcosis wears off on the way up as quickly as it builds on the way down. All that is assuming you have enough air tanks to be able to make the dive, because you inhale more compressed air at depth than you do at the surface. It's just squeezed into a tighter space. The arch in the blue hole at 56 meters deep is really beyond that safe limit, but technically it is possible to do. It's not as deep as the 60 to 70 meters for oxygen toxicity. If you believe you can tolerate the nitrogen narcosis, then maybe you feel comfortable with the depth. Most dive computers have a decompression diving model so that if you do go past your limits, it will tell you where to make decompression stops. And if you're an experienced diver who's calm and collected, you probably don't breathe as rapidly as an inexperienced diver. So perhaps one tank of air would last long enough to make the dive, if everything goes perfectly to plan. In April 2000, a Russian-Israeli diving instructor named Yuri Lipski, aged 22, visits the Blue Hole. As an experienced and responsible diving instructor, he speaks with several local divers to share his plans and get some local knowledge about the arch. One of these divers is Tariq Omar, an accomplished technical diver who's been diving the Blue Hole since 1992, and after diving the site for 8 years, knows the location very well. Tariq tells Yuri he needs 2 weeks of technical diving training before diving the arch. Recreational divers can always make a direct ascent to the surface without stopping for decompression stops. In a cave or the arch, you can't simply ascend to the surface, and at 56 meters, a single tank with air is not ideal. Technical divers are trained to plan for the different depths they reach over the course of their dive. They're practiced in using the additional equipment and tanks they need to make the dive safely. They're trained to reduce the percentage of oxygen for deeper sections and replace nitrogen with helium to reduce the effects of nitrogen narcosis. Science changes the range of limits. As a technical diving instructor, Tariq understands these limits. He also knows what it means to ignore those limits. His nickname is the Bone Collector. As one of the few divers who are trained and experienced enough to reach the bottom of the 100-meter sinkhole, he's had the grim task of retrieving the bodies of divers who have not understood those limits or simply thought they knew better. Yuri realizes that he doesn't have enough time on this trip to complete 2 weeks of training with one of the local technical divers. On the 28th of April, Yuri makes his way to the dive site, sets up his diving equipment and a head-mounted camera to film his dive. He's due to fly home the next day, and this is his last opportunity to dive the Blue Hole. We don't know exactly what his intentions are. Some of the local and more experienced divers have said that he spoke to them about diving down to 56 meters to see the arch. Diving through the arch with his 12-liter tank on air has been done before, but it's at the absolute limit of what is technically possible, and there's almost no margin for error. The local dive masters told him they wouldn't take him to the arch without the proper training and equipment. Other divers said he was planning on doing a bounce dive to descend as deep as he could to set a new personal record and then resurface. Yuri puts on his 12-kilogram weight belt and his BCD, or buoyancy control device, which is an inflatable jacket that allows him to control his buoyancy and float at his dive depth. Yuri is a young instructor. It's quite likely that he doesn't have enough money to buy new equipment, and it's possible that his BCD is second-hand with a number of dives. I don't know what condition it's in. Without a BCD, the weight from his belt would make him negatively buoyant and sink to the bottom of the sinkhole, 100 meters below the waterline. The 12 kilograms of lead on his weight belt is perhaps a little on the high side, but as a diving instructor, I'd imagine that he knows how to work out the right amount. Now, there is a video from Yuri's head cam. If you feel comfortable watching it, I'll leave a link in the description. It's not pleasant and I don't suggest you do watch it, but I'll take snippets and try to explain what I think could have happened. But it's an old video and a lot is blurry, so it's not easy to interpret, and we don't know what Yuri was actually planning. We know that he wanted to see the arch, but we don't know if he decided to ignore the local dive masters and make a bounce dive, or if he had something else in mind. As a diving instructor, he should know better than diving alone, so I don't think he's making the best decisions. The video starts at 17:02, and the first 3 minutes show Yuri checking his camera rig and heading out on the water until he's over the deepest part. His breathing is even and calm, as you would expect from an experienced diver. At roughly 17:05, he starts to descend at a fairly controlled rate. At 17:05:56, you can hear him draw in a calm, even breath. At 17:06, there's a silent sound that you could almost interpret as a squeal, but I believe this is Yuri starting to equalize his ears. I sometimes have the same sound when I equalize. His breathing is still calm and methodical. At 17:06:09, you hear him equalize again. There are some other sounds which I can't understand, and I don't think they're important. Yuri doesn't seem to react to them. As he continues his descent, at 17:06:25, you can hear him use his power inflator to add air into his BCD to slow his descent and control his buoyancy. His breathing is calm. At 17:07:38, Yuri adds air to his BCD. In my mind, besides the idea that he's making this dive alone, which isn't a great idea, he is breathing normally, equalizing and controlling his buoyancy, which suggests he's in control of his faculties. One of the theories about this accident is that Yuri decided to commit suicide, which I don't believe is true. He spoke to other divers to find someone to go with him. When they wouldn't go, he decided to go alone. And he's trying to control his dive. His breathing is even and paced, not erratic and heavy. But over the next 30 seconds, the light visibly changes as Yuri descends deeper, and at 17:08:08, his computer beeps, which is possibly a depth alarm when he passes 30 or 40 meters. Or he's passed the no decompression limit on the computer, which means he needs to make decompression stops on the way up, and he's already passed the recreational safety limits. Because the visibility drops sharply, the only indication of the speed of his descent is from the particles and bubbles moving past the camera lens. The rate of his descent does seem to be increasing. If that was a depth alarm at 40 meters, it took 3 minutes to get there. 13 seconds later at 17:08:21, Yuri seems to hit the side of the narrowing wall, and I assume he's getting close to the bottom. He hasn't added any air into his BCD for almost 1 minute, which means his descent is no longer under control. It's possible that his BCD isn't inflating and he knows it, so he's not inflating it because it's not working anyway. But his breathing is still calm and collected. So I imagine he thinks he's still in control. Right now, I have to assume he's below 30 or 40 meters, and this is roughly the depth when a diver starts to experience nitrogen narcosis. The deeper he goes, the more knocked he feels, and the less likely he is to take control of the dive. In less than 60 seconds, Yuri's gone from the illusion of control to the danger zone. At 17:08:30, we see his computer for the first time, and it shows his depth at 81.7 meters. Less than 12 seconds later, we glimpse his computer almost 10 meters deeper at 89.8 meters, and a few seconds after that at 91.6 meters below the waterline. At this depth, he's beyond the limits where people start to experience convulsions from oxygen toxicity, and he's absolutely experiencing severe nitrogen narcosis. Over the next few minutes, while Yuri crawls along the bottom of the blue hole, you can sense that he's scrambling to get out of the situation, but his breathing is still somewhat even. At 17:09:01, he uses his power floater on his BCD again, but there doesn't seem to be any traction. He certainly doesn't start to ascend. Maybe he hasn't put enough air in, or there's a problem with the BCD. At this point, he doesn't have enough air to make it back to the surface, but that doesn't matter because his brain is simply not functioning properly. Between the nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity, he doesn't think to drop his weight belt. He just crawls over the bottom, kicking up silt in a desperate attempt to get somewhere. Anywhere but the hell I'm sure he knows he's in. At 17:09:19, his breathing is still even and composed, and he continues to breathe somewhat normally until 17:11:03, when he takes the camera off his head and there are no more camera movements. Some divers who spoke to Yuri earlier in the day noticed that he hasn't returned. After asking around, they're concerned he's attempted to dive the arch and something's happened, so they raised the alarm. Tarek Omar is given the grim task of going to look for Yuri. Tarek knows that this is what happens to divers who don't have the right training and equipment, and it's precisely why he told Yuri that he needs to train for 2 weeks. Tarek has retrieved the bodies of many divers in the blue hole. It's easy going down. The challenge is coming back alive. The planning and equipment he uses is far more complex than Yuri's. Tarek uses one mix of gas to descend part of the way. Then he switches to a gas mixture with a lower percentage of oxygen to eliminate the effects of oxygen toxicity. And he replaces some of the nitrogen with helium to reduce the effects of nitrogen narcosis. This is called trimix, and the percentages of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium are carefully controlled for each depth Tarek reaches. He has multiple cylinders, each with a different mixture to switch between as he descends, and then again as he ascends with Yuri's body. In a dive that takes minutes to descend, Tarek finds Yuri's body and his camera. Then he spends 3 hours coming back to the surface, completing lengthy decompression stops. When Tarek gets to the surface, he can see that Yuri's BCD has ruptured. The inflatable bladder that controls his buoyancy is not holding air. Over the next few days, Tarek hands over the equipment to Yuri's mom. She asks Tarek to help her dismantle the kit and inspect the camera. Together, they watch the video Yuri captured. This video has been dissected by many experts. There are multiple explanations and questions we will never be able to answer. The two that stand out for me are whether he intended to dive to the arch or was he planning a shallower dive? And did his BCD rupture causing his descent? Or did he get it snagged while he was crawling around in his final moments? My view is that he seemed calm throughout the dive, which suggests that the BCD didn't rupture during his descent. I think he was already suffering from nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity by the time he reached the bottom. I think his concentration lapsed during descent and he didn't realize how deep he was, and then he tore the BCD at the bottom. Whether it was a lapse in judgment or equipment failure, by the time he reached 90 meters, it was too late. He didn't have the cognitive capacity to drop his weight belt, and he wouldn't have had enough air to make the 3 hours of decompression stops to make it back to the surface. Tarek says he will always regret that Yuri's mom watched the video of her son's death.